Okay, Joe, you look back at this game against Buffalo, and I'm sure the Seahawks would have liked to play a game on Monday just to get rid of it and get it out of the rearview mirror. But what do you make of that last game, and what maybe these guys can take from it?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because the Seahawks two losses, I think that's probably the one that's easier to flush because it was just so bad across the board, right? Where you look at that Cardinals game and there's that handful of plays where you're saying, gosh, if just one of those things goes our way, we win that game and we're still undefeated. Where this one, you got beat and you got beat pretty handily. And I know it got close there in the fourth quarter, and that's the nature of a Russell Wilson led team. But you give up 24 points over the first four drives defensively, you're going to have a hard time winning a football game. The concerns in the secondary are legit. They might have to be without Shaquille Griffin and Quentin Dunbar in Los Angeles against the Rams in Week 10. But beyond that, it's everything, right? And I think that's what's so frustrating defensively is it's execution, it's guys just getting beat even when they're doing their job, and it's coaching and not making adjustments quick enough, and maybe not catering the scheme to fit what they need to, right? We've heard on a number of occasions Pete Carroll kind of lamenting this or that and things that he maybe wishes they could have adjusted quicker during games, and so it is frustrating. I think it's important to remind yourself that you're 6-2 if you're in that locker room and you're feeling annoyed about that game, but there's really no time to feel sorry for yourself because this next week is absolutely massive, right? We're recording this on a Thursday. And so these 7 days, starting on Sunday, then a short turnaround, coming back home and playing the Cardinals on Thursday, are pivotal. One, you can't lose 2 games to the Cardinals. You can't get swept. But at the same time, against the Rams, they're a team that you've never matched up with well against since Sean McVay took over. And so it's going to be an uphill climb this week. But, we viewed these 5 games out of the bye, Cardinals twice, Rams, Niners, Bills, as like a really pivotal stretch because it gets a little bit softer after that. The schedule does. They're 1-2 right now. And we said 3-2 would be really good. And so now you got to win these 2. And so pressure is on a bit if you want to maintain your standing in the NFC West.
Well, we talked about the pivotal point in the schedule, and yeah, they've lost 2 out of 3, and they could very well lose 3 out of 4 going into that Cardinals game. But man, when you look at their upcoming schedule, the Rams have played all their NFC East teams, and the Seahawks are just licking their chops, man. They get to go through that division, and they get the Jets too. So, boy, the second half of the season is really favorable, but I agree with you. You want to be on top and playing well and not just relying on rolling those weak teams.
Yeah, and you want to be able to have, be in the driver's seat, right? You want to go into that slate of games with having to go 4-0 and hoping the Cardinals drop one, right? Because that game, we'll talk about it next week as well. But, I mean, you lose both games to a divisional opponent, especially one like the Cardinals who looks like they're going to be sticking around in this race the whole season. All of a sudden you have to finish on top of them at the end of the year by a game as opposed to being tied and potentially winning other tiebreakers. So they are crucial games. You want to maintain your standing. You want to have some momentum going into, a 4-game stretch that should be your easiest 4-game stretch of the season and give yourself even more cushion going into those final 2 weeks against the Rams and Niners. So this is a really monster week because also the benefit is once you get through this week and you get to that Thursday game, you do kind of get that pseudo secondary bye with the weekend off. And so a chance to maybe get a little bit healthier. So you have to split, and the split has to be winning the Arizona game, but this is certainly a big one as well.
The Rams seem to be one of those teams in the NFL that they've avoided some key injuries. They've been able to stay somewhat healthy. And when we talked last week, you were already laughing about pointing toward this matchup because Sean McVay, the head coach of the Rams, seems to always dial it up strong against the Seahawks and their defense. Do you still feel that same way, the way the Rams are playing, that this Seahawks defense is really going to have its hands full?
Well, I would actually lean no because the Rams have been pretty human on offense when they haven't played in the NFC West. I mean, you look at what's happened the last couple of weeks playing the Dolphins and the Niners, losing both of those games going into their bye week. They don't look great offensively, quite frankly. And Jared Goff, again, the pendulum, and we've known this, right? The pendulum swings so far in both directions for Jared Goff to where he looks like a bottom third quarterback and to where he looks like a top 5 quarterback. And he always looks like the top 5 version of himself when he's playing the Seahawks. I mean, Sean McVay's offense is like the enigma or conundrum that Pete Carroll just can't figure out. And it's interesting because he comes from the Shanahan coaching tree, and yet, Kyle Shanahan, while having success against the Seahawks, hasn't had near the success in terms of the yards and the points put up offensively that Sean McVay has had. And so, given that the Rams have struggled, I hear that and I understand that, but the Seahawks also have been so bad defensively where there's not a whole lot of signs for optimism to where you'd say, this will be the week. This will be the week the Seahawks figure out how to contain a Sean McVay-led offense. And maybe it is because the pass rush is better, but without Quentin Dunbar and without Shaquille Griffin potentially, it could be a long day, even with Jamal Adams and Carlos Dunlap rushing the passer.
We talked about Snacks Harrison this week. It looks like it's finally going to be the week where he gets back on the field. He admitted in his press conference that he needed to have patience. He needed to get himself into football shape. He knew he was somewhat out of shape, and he was willing to go through all of that process and be patient. And now it looks like his patience is finally going to pay off. And how much of a force will he be in his first game with the Seahawks? Because he is known as being a run stuffer.
Yeah, well, what's cool is that it was the process and then some, right? He's been ready for a couple of weeks, and they haven't had a roster spot for him. And meanwhile, the Bucs and the Dolphins are knocking on his door and saying, hey, we'll bring him to the active roster right now. And, he mentioned, for one, he wanted to be in Seattle all along. He knew that during the offseason. This was a place where he wanted to be. And on top of that, he's already moved his family. He's 7 kids in all to Seattle. He didn't want to uproot them and move them again for a second time in just a matter of a couple months. So, he understood that, hey, I'm not going to run from some extra work, even though this is taking maybe a bit longer than I anticipated. But you're right. Now his opportunity is coming with Brian Monet's ankle injury. And it's going to be interesting. It's not an ideal matchup for a run stuffing nose tackle. And, yes, the Rams do like to be consistent with the running game. And they've got a trio of backs that they use, first and foremost being Darrell Henderson. But at the same time, they throw a lot of window dressing at you, and they really challenge you horizontally, not just vertically. And so they're going to have him moving around, and it's going to be interesting to see, one, how many snaps he plays, and two, if he can leave a mark, right? We saw Carlos Dunlap leave an immediate mark in his debut with a sack and 3 tackles for loss. This is a big game, and, while the pressure's on the Seahawks secondary and the pass defense, and, as they're on pace to shatter the infamous record for most passing yards ever allowed in a single season, they'll take any help they can get. And it's nice when you lose Brian Monet and you've got a guy like Snacks Harrison there to step into the void immediately.
We haven't talked about Dunlap at all, and I don't want to keep you much longer, but let's give that guy some props, man. He rolled right into the Seahawks, and I thought he played really well last week.
He did. And it's funny. It's kind of in different ways, right? You look back at the DK chase down tackle against Budda Baker, and you're like, man, it just becomes a footnote. It was this all-time incredible play. You lose, and it becomes a footnote. Carlos Dunlap getting 3 tackles for loss and a sack in his Seahawks debut, and the Seahawks pass rush getting 7 sacks when they came into the game with just 12. It's just a footnote. It's hard to feel. It's crazy that stat was a thing that happened in that game when they gave up 44 points, more points they've ever allowed in the Pete Carroll era. And so, again, it becomes this kind of silver lining, if you wish, but is it really a silver lining? But it was impressive, and he showed that he's been he's probably the best edge rusher on the team, as a pure edge rusher, right? I mean, Jamal Adams might be the best pass rusher, but he brings a layer, Dunlap does that we haven't seen from Benson Mayowa. And so it's going to be really interesting to see if Benson Mayowa is able to get back, how diminished are his reps at this point. So was good to see, and certainly will be something that the Seahawks need to see more of as the season progresses.
All right, just a couple more for you. The running back situation, Pete says it looks like Chris Carson is ahead of Carlos Hyde as far as his chances to come back. He's probably the one that would make it back. But still, with a foot problem, we don't know if he's going to make it back. So, they could possibly go into another game where it's DJ Dallas and Travis Homer. And, I mean, listen, that's not going to get it done. It's not taking any pressure off of Russell Wilson. And then there's this other theme that Russ is pressing, and, they need him to play maybe a little bit better football and not throw the – he's obviously 5 turnovers in his last or 5 picks in his last 3 games. That can't happen either, Joe. So at what point do you put a little blame on Russ and say, hey, man, look at what's going on around you, and you're going to have to adjust?
Yeah, I think it's fair to put some on him, certainly. I think we've seen him make some bad decisions that are uncharacteristic, but I think you really have to look at it turnover by turnover. And so I think the fumbles are the ones where you can say you should have seen that pressure. You should have felt that and gotten rid of it. The picks are really hard to lose a ton of sleep over because it's 4th and goal, or what was it, 4th and 1 from the 6. Nobody's open. You're not going to take a sack. You're not going to throw it out of bounds. You may as well try to get a lucky touchdown or maybe a lucky pass interference call, and all of a sudden you get some new life. And then the other one was on 3rd and 25 when you're down 14 points and you force it into a tight window and it's not there. So those ones, again, I think you really have to take with a grain of salt. And they're on Russ, certainly. Every interception, or most of them are. But I think the fumbles are probably more maybe concerning in terms of trying to do too much and hold on the football a tick longer than he knows he should. But yeah, they need Chris Carson badly. I mean, he's such a tone setter. And the reason why this defense for the Rams is such a bad matchup is because they have an elite corner that can potentially match up with DK Metcalf, and you would expect to shadow DK Metcalf. But the defensive line led by Aaron Donald can get home without blitzing, right? And so you are getting to Russell Wilson without compromising what you're trying to do in the secondary. And you look last year, that game, I think it was week 14, 15, a Sunday Night Football game in Los Angeles. That was a butt whooping, and that's about as bad a whooping as the Seahawks will take. And it was pretty much comprehensive. And so I think that's the fear, is that same sort of game playing out where you can't stop the Rams worth anything, and you can't keep Aaron Donald and that Rams defensive line in front of you to give Russ time to make a play. So, I think the Seahawks are obviously aware of that and will be, trying to game plan to counter that. But this is definitely a matchup that favors Los Angeles pretty much across the board.
Yeah, it's going to be a good matchup. Hopefully it'll be a good game. I'm a little leery about this one, but, if I had to make a living gambling, I'd be broken on the street for sure. So we'll see what happens. All right, Joe. Thanks, man. We'll do it again next week.
Paul, I love it, man. Appreciate it.